transitioning to the diet, eating these new foods, avoiding all of those things, how challenging was it for you? Did you find it to be really easy? Was the food tasty, or was it quite difficult to transition off of the stuff you were eating before?
Yeah. So, I mean, you think that you're going to miss all the things that you enjoy, right? But you very quickly, I think anyway, what happened was my body just started to not crave those things anymore, the sweets, the breads, the carbs that I thought that I was going to miss. And it really just was craving the heavy fat sources because that was what was working so well to fuel my body and brain and was feeling better. And so, yeah, I don't really, or didn't really even in the beginning, miss much of the stuff that I was needing to cut out. And I think that a lot of people get really hung up on this medical intervention as being really restrictive. But the way that it's been helpful for me to kind of reframe that is it's more, of a selective diet where I am being really intentional about choosing what foods I'm going to fuel my body with so that my body and my brain function as best as they possibly can.
Yeah, okay. I'm glad you brought up the restriction. I think if you were to ask 100 people on the street if it would be a great idea to put somebody who had had disordered eating issues in the past or a mental illness on a very restrictive diet, I would be rightly surprised if there was a single person out of 100 that said that would be a good idea. Like, I would expect people to think like, no, that's a very bad idea. And one would think that. And we've got, again, latest research, the interview you did with Guido Frank. We've had other case studies out there with, eating disorders in particular. And this, what seems to be a very restrictive diet. How do you respond to people that do say like, I wouldn't be doing this type of restriction, avoiding an entire food group? Like, that doesn't sound like a great idea.
Yeah. And I think, people were pretty upset about that in the beginning, that this project was going to trigger my eating disorder because some people on the channel knew that I struggled with that or worried that just watching it was going to trigger their own eating disorder. And so that was something that was on our mind to begin with and tried to navigate that as best or as healthily as possible. But, you know, from a personal anecdotal perspective, it has kind of really healed my relationship with food and eating, which was kind of unexpected. You would think that if you're engaging in behaviors or activities like weighing your food and tracking your food and being really like on top of what you're putting into your body, that seems like that is almost going into disordered eating territory and that would trigger struggles that you may have experienced before around that. But I think it actually really healed that element in terms of me understanding eating and food as choosing foods or nutrition that is going to improve the functioning of my body and looking at it more as fuel that is going to help my brain and my body thrive, as opposed to this thing that I need to restrict or control or whatever to lose weight or to, deal with symptoms or to have this semblance of control. And yeah, it's been a really surprising experience where even when I'm not completely struggling with an eating disorder, there was still always it always took up a little section of my brain, kind of thinking about that or falling into that disordered eating thoughts or even behaviors. But I just don't experience that now. It doesn't take up any part of my brain energy or capacity thinking about that. And yeah, talking with Dr. Guido Frank about his um, trial that he's running with using the ketogenic diet to treat anorexia, very similar results where it's just really eliminating that struggle or that part of the brain that's always kind of thinking about the disordered eating behaviors or thoughts, just kind of being removed for a lot of these people. And it just feels freeing in a way.
Yeah. It's one thing to hear him get on stage and talk about, the people in the study and the case studies and individual experiences, but then to also get into the science and mechanistically explain exactly what's going on. It's so much more enforcing to know both of those things. And it's so well explained in that way how ketones can be a fuel for the brain. And more people need to know this. Like in this conference, I'm sitting there, I'm sitting next to my friend Robin Dobbins. She is like me, she's 100% carnivore. She has reversed her bipolar. We love the carnivore diet. I've been carnivore for 15, or I'm sorry, not 15, 5.5 years. And we're sitting here watching the presentation, which is given by Dr. Brett Scher. He's interviewing Hannah Warren. She has also reversed her bipolar by eating a vegetarian diet. Like there's so many different ways that people can do this. And I want people to know, it's like the way that Georgia writes about it in her book, there's so many different things you could choose. You can do this on a vegetarian diet. This should be open to anybody who wants to be an omnivore. Some people might do better on a carnivore diet, but more people need to know that there is a variety of ways that you can do this. There's just things you need to look out for. So with you in particular, I love the video where you showed with kind of like what you do in a day. But can you share with the listener like what does a practical day of eating look like for you now?
Sure. So, what does a practical day of eating look like? Um, so yeah, we have a lot of staple dishes that we just kind of cycle through. Rob is getting a little bit bored of them and frustrated that I just keep making the same thing, but I don't know, it works for me. So yeah, we've just come up with different dishes, whether it's beef or chicken or sometimes fish mixed with some kind of fat, whether it's avocado oil. We've been exploring ghee more, or yeah, some kind of fat involved, butter. Um, Reading in Dr. Georgia Eads' book that maybe you should stay away from lactose products, but we do have a lot of like cheese and cream and that sort of thing mixed in too. Throw in avocados with almost every meal. And yeah, it's pretty, yeah, we just kind of repeat the same thing all the time. And I like that, but yeah.
That's funny. Again, I would prefer to hear a few more ribeyes in there, but you know what? That sounds absolutely delicious. And the avocados and everything. That sounds great. So we know kind of now what happens. People start changing their diet and they start to feel a lot better. And part of that, Nicole and I have talked a lot about this, is at some point you may have to address with your practitioner getting off of medications. And you've kind of gone down that path. Can you tell us what that was like? What the preliminary signs were for you that like maybe you could start to kind of taper off some of these drugs?
Yeah. So I started this project in December with the intention of not even like touching my meds, making any changes at all until like at least 6 months in, when I had a good idea of how it was affecting me. And yeah, if it was going to be possible to even reduce my meds at all. But I think it was about maybe even like 3 weeks in, it was very early on, where I started to experience like really intense sedation. And I didn't really know what was going on at first. I was like, oh no, is this the ketogenic diet? Like, is this a bad side effect or a version of keto flu or whatnot? But I started to realize that it felt very similar to any time I've been over medicated in the past. And it felt really similar to what I've experienced as a side effect, being sedation from antipsychotic medication. And so I talked to Nicole about it, and she put forward the idea or the concept of potentiation, which is where, my understanding, I'm not sure if I'm going to explain this right, but where I was using the ketogenic diet as a metabolic therapy and my system or whatever began to repair. And all of a sudden, it didn't need the same amount of medication anymore. And so I ended up being over medicated on the amount of medication that I was on before I started this intervention. And so, yeah, went right to my psychiatrist to kind of explain what was going on. And he was like, okay, well, let's try reducing and see how that goes. So I think I was on 100 milligrams of my antipsychotic at the beginning of this. So we reduced to 80 at that 3 week mark when I was really feeling the sedation, and immediately felt relief from that overwhelming sedation that I was experiencing. So it was very clear that it was potentiation that was happening. I was still feeling kind of sedated though. And so I went back to my psychiatrist and said, well, can we reduce it a little bit more even? Because I'm still getting these sedating effects. And so we actually went down to 60 milligrams too. And on that, I felt really good again and was feeling, back to being stable. So that was a really interesting element that I did not anticipate at all. the idea of potentiation and my body just not needing as much, and then, getting increased side effects as a result of being on too much. But after that, I kind of got more curious about, okay, well, clearly it's possible to go down off my medications, and the keto diet is doing something to support my brain and my body better. And so, with my psychiatrist and with Nicole kind of overseeing it, we kind of created this plan, I guess, that was typically in like 8-month increments of gradually reducing more and more. And so I'm currently on 10 milligrams of my antipsychotic, where I started at 100. And even a year ago, when I was hospitalized, I was on 140 milligrams of this antipsychotic and 2 doses of another antipsychotic per day. And so it's wild how much I've been able to move away from psychiatric medication.